General Choi recounted a discussion that had taken place a few days earlier. It turned out the Crown Prince had already addressed the issue during the design phase. Back then, Jang Yong-sil had presented a blueprint and said, "This is the Sky Piercing Thunderous Strike design, drawn by the Crown Prince himself." Two officials stared at the blueprint in confusion. "We don't get it. The design looks so strange. What does it mean by male and female threads?" The Crown Prince then explained, "If we want to load gunpowder into the ball, making a single solid piece from the start is very inefficient. Instead, the ball is split into two parts. The upper half has male threads, while the bottom has female threads. By twisting them together, they'll form a perfect seal. When the projectile hits the target, the resulting explosion will be far more powerful." The two officials were stunned. General Choi added, "This kind of power is terrifying. With a weapon like this, our army would gain a massive advantage." General Choi then asked the Crown Prince, "Should we report this to His Majesty right away?" The Crown Prince calmly replied, "There's still a lot we need to test. The thinner the outer layer, the greater the destructive power. So, first, let's try gradually reducing the thickness." After countless tests and non-stop production by the craftsman, Yi Cheon rushed over with a beaming face. The Crown Prince could tell. This had to be good news. Excitedly, Yi Cheon reported, "Your Highness, we've discovered that the minimum thickness that can still survive being fired and landing is a 30% reduction." The Crown Prince responded, "Really? Then let's load it with gunpowder and see what kind of difference it makes." Once again, the craftsmen worked day and night to create a new prototype for the next series of tests, even though their bodies were already exhausted. The next morning, another test was conducted. Yi Cheon nervously reported the results to the Crown Prince. "Your Highness, this time, the minimum thickness was reduced by another 30%. Seeing the results, Yi Cheon couldn't wait to report it to King Sejong, but Hyang hesitated, then said seriously, "However, there's one problem. The blast radius is too wide. There's a risk of our own troops getting caught in the explosion. We need to find a way to narrow the blast radius without weakening the power." That statement left both officials feeling even more hopeless. They gathered with two craftsmen and began discussing the problem. "How can we increase the explosive power while reducing the blast radius?" One of the craftsmen, his face worn and tired, kept going over the documents, sighing heavily. "I give up. What His Highness is asking for? It's just too difficult." From a distance, Crown Prince Hyang quietly observed them. He thought to himself, "Looks like I'll have to step in a little." He approached them and asked, "So, any progress?" While straightening his messy robe, one of the craftsmen respectfully replied, "Your Highness, we're still trying to find a solution." At that moment, the Crown Prince made a suggestion. "What if we line the inside of the bomb with a thick layer of clay and embed small cast iron pellets into it? Once the clay dries, the pellets will be locked in place. What do you think?" The officials were stunned, and so were the craftsmen. "That's it! What a brilliant idea, Your Highness. We never would have thought of that," one of the craftsmen exclaimed. The Crown Prince gave a slight smile and turned to leave. But before walking away, he encouraged them. "I'm counting on you. Keep up the good work." Once the Crown Prince was out of sight, Yi Cheon and General Choi remained frozen in awe. "It's like His Highness knew the answer from the start," General Choi whispered. Yi Cheon nodded with a bitter smile. "The more I think about it, the more I think you're right. So what now? Damn it, then all our hard work was for nothing?" One of the craftsmen slammed his robe to the floor in frustration. "That guy's like a goblin in human form," he grumbled. Everyone was upset. After spending days working non-stop and sleeping at the workshop, they realized the Crown Prince had already figured it all out from the beginning. In the end, the tactic worked. The Crown Prince had successfully pushed the craftsmen to think for themselves and conduct research. They weren't just following orders anymore. They had begun to truly understand the principles behind weapon making. Thanks to this process, they grew into skilled craftsmen capable of mass-producing the bombs without any issues. With confidence, General Choi declared, "Mass production is no longer a problem." At this point, the king could no longer hide his astonishment. In his mind, he could only think, "This child." I'm at a loss for words. But then, a question popped into King Sejong's mind. "Wait, there's one thing that's been bothering me since the test. Why didn't the bomb explode immediately? I'm curious about the mechanism." General Choi frowned slightly and answered cautiously, "Because, Your Majesty, inside the Sky Piercing Thunderous Strike, there's a little secret." King Sejong flinched. "A little secret? What do you mean?" After a brief pause, General Choi finally explained, "It has to do with the ability to control the timing of the explosion, Your Majesty." The king was taken aback. "Is that true?" General Choi nodded. "Yes. By coiling the fuse around a bamboo tube, we're able to delay the detonation." The king's eyes lit up with excitement. He was beginning to grasp the concept. "So, the length of the fuse determines when it explodes?" he asked. General Choi respectfully replied, "Exactly, Your Majesty." The king gazed at the bomb in awe, as if he had just discovered a treasure. "So, only we know the exact moment it will explode. This little secret is absolutely brilliant." Meanwhile, the Crown Prince simply smiled while watching the conversation and thought to himself, Actually, this technique has existed since King Moonjong's time. He then approached his father and respectfully said, "Father, I've shown you all the weapons. It's time for you to return to the palace." The king nodded and said, "Very well." But before that, just as the crown prince was about to respond, his father placed a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. "Isn't there still something else you want to show me?" A wave of nervousness swept over him. Cold sweat formed on his face. With a slightly trembling voice, he answered, "Of course, father. Please follow me." When they arrived, King Sejong's eyes sparkled. The curiosity that had been building inside him was finally about to be satisfied. At last. I can see it with my own eyes. His attention shifted to the soldiers' uniforms. Something about them was different. They weren't the typical uniforms worn by Joseon soldiers. With a firm voice, he turned to his son. "Explain these uniforms to me." The crown prince immediately bowed respectfully. "Yes, father. First of all, regarding the soldiers' uniforms, we've made a few adjustments to make them more suitable for musket warfare. We also chose to dye them green and earthy brown." The king raised an eyebrow, his eyes sharp. "Why those colors?" The crown prince, having anticipated the question, responded without hesitation. "These colors were chosen to make our troops harder to spot on the battlefield. Green blends in with forest trees, while brown matches the soil and dust of the battlefield." The king stroked his chin, thinking deeply, then said, "But aren't soldiers supposed to wear bright colors on the battlefield to intimidate the enemy? And how will they recognize each other easily?" The crown prince remained calm. "We're still refining our military strategies to address those concerns, father. These uniforms are still in the testing phase and need more time before they are used in actual battle." King Sejong slowly nodded, seemingly accepting the explanation. But the crown prince wasn't done yet. "That's not the only innovation we're working on, father. We're also trying to improve the soldiers' armor." With that, Hyang invited everyone inside. As they entered the room, the king's eyes immediately landed on a familiar display of armor. It was the same type of armor used by the Joseon military. The crown prince looked at his father before speaking again, his tone turning slightly more serious. But in reality, outfitting all soldiers with this kind of armor is no easy task. As you know, many soldiers have to find their own armor. Because of that, the quality varies greatly. Those who are wealthy can afford better protection, while the less fortunate have to make do with weak, easily pierced armor. King Sejong listened closely. The officials standing behind him remained silent, but it was clear they were waiting to hear more. The crown prince took a deep breath before continuing. "This is brigandine armor, which has been used since the end of the previous dynasty. Its silk outer layer is reinforced with small metal plates, offering decent protection." He paused for a moment, then looked at the king with conviction. "But there are some major flaws that we can't ignore." King Sejong looked at him with interest. First, the manufacturing process is extremely complex. It takes a long time to create the small metal plates, and each one must be carefully riveted into place, requiring a large amount of labor. Second, the cost. From silk to feathers, the materials are expensive and hard to come by. Third, the protection. While it does fairly well against arrows, there's a fatal weakness. The underarms and sides are left exposed, making soldiers vulnerable in close combat. And finally, the weight. The armor is so heavy that it restricts movement. Since it's worn like a robe, the entire weight rests on the shoulders. After hours of wearing it, even the strongest soldiers feel the strain. The king looked at his son and said, "You're right, Crown Prince." For a moment, silence filled the room, until the king finally asked, "So then, do you have a solution for all this?" A faint smile appeared on Hyang's face. He stepped forward and, with a dramatic gesture, pulled back a curtain to reveal a metal figure dressed like a royal guard. Gasps of amazement filled the room. All eyes turned to the object on display, a suit of armor unlike anything they had ever seen before. "What is this?" King Sejong asked, his voice filled with surprise. With respectful pride, the crown prince answered, "This is a new type of armor we've designed, armor that addresses all the previous weaknesses and will lead the Joseon army into a new era. As you all know, brigandine armor is extremely expensive. If we stick with it, only the nobility will be able to afford proper protection. At first, I planned to disregard armor altogether, but I can't ignore the safety of the soldiers fighting in close quarters. So by combining Western-style steel plates with the Korean-style brigandine, we've made several key improvements. First, we replaced the small embedded iron plates with a single solid steel plate. This allows both the front and back of the torso to be protected by 2 layers of steel, ensuring full coverage of the upper body. Also, the armor is now split into 2 parts, an upper body protector and a lower body protector, which helps distribute the weight more evenly. The lower protector is specifically designed to shield the thighs. Everyone listening to the crown prince fell silent. First, the cavalry and frontline close combat soldiers will be equipped with full body armor that protects from neck to knee. Meanwhile, musket and artillery troops will wear a lighter version. King Sejong interrupted. "What do the soldiers who've worn it have to say?" General Choi answered, "They say it's a bit heavier, but since the weight is distributed more evenly across the body, it actually feels more comfortable. Plus, the areas that used to be exposed are now protected, which makes them feel much safer." This was the first time the king had ever seen armor like this. King Sejong stared intently at the armor. It wasn't just the design that was unique. The structure itself was remarkable. Hyang gave a small smile as he thought to himself, even though I designed it myself, I still find it surprising. Then he spoke aloud. This armor will drastically reduce production costs and manufacturing time, making it far more efficient. The more he explained, the more captivated the audience became. Suddenly, the left minister, who had been deep in thought, stepped forward and asked, "Your Highness, may I ask a question?" Hyang replied, "Of course. As far as I can tell, both the helmet and the armor plates are made entirely of iron, correct?" Hyang's eyes narrowed slightly, impressed by the minister's attention to detail. He crouched down to examine the armor more closely. Then the minister continued. "So, does that mean the blacksmiths will have to forge every single plate by hand? Wouldn't that be incredibly labor-intensive? I'm concerned the production costs might even exceed that of brigandine armor." Hyang nodded slightly, acknowledging the concern. After a brief moment of thought, he responded, "That's a great question. I had the same concern, which is why I plan to use the stamping method." The crowd looked confused at the Crown Prince's answer. "Stamping?" they asked hesitantly. Hyang answered firmly, "Yes, stamping." He thought to himself, "The main reason I adopted the Western-style steel plate concept was because mass production requires stamping machines." King Sejong, who had been quietly listening all along, was surprised by the idea. "Stamping? What exactly does that mean?" he asked curiously. "As the name suggests, Father, but rather than explain it, it's better if you see it for yourself. We'll prepare a demonstration for you shortly." King Sejong asked again, "Can't you show it to me now?" With calm confidence, Hyang turned and replied, "There are still a few things we haven't shown you. We'll get everything ready as quickly as possible, but for now, I ask that you first review the results of our work." An hour passed. The royal officials returned with their reports. "There are no issues in the records, Your Majesty." King Sejong nodded in approval. "Good. Well done." He then turned to General Choi and said, "You've worked hard as well. Thanks to all of your efforts, our kingdom will become stronger." General Choi bowed respectfully. "Your kindness is beyond measure." Everyone's faces lit up. They imagined they could finally go home. But the day wasn't over yet. Suddenly, King Sejong said, "I want to visit the weapons warehouse now. I'd like to see firsthand how the muskets and iron armor are being made." The room fell silent in an instant. Everyone froze. They thought today's tasks were finished, that they could go home and finally rest. But clearly that wasn't the case. Now they had to accompany King Sejong on his unexpected plan. One official gently tried to object. "Your Majesty, the sun is beginning to set. There may not be enough time to tour the warehouse, and if you're away from the palace too long, government affairs might be delayed." King Sejong considered this for a moment, then nodded. "That's exactly why I want to go now while I'm still here. It's not because I'm impatient. Don't misunderstand me." The general bowed once again. "I understand, Your Majesty." When King Sejong arrived at the weapons warehouse, a loud voice rang out. "The king has arrived!" Beside him, Hyang smiled brightly. "Father, I'll start by showing you the cannon-making process." Everyone looked eager as they gathered to watch the demonstration. In front of them, two blacksmiths were hard at work, forging red-hot iron into intricate shapes. Every detail was hammered with extraordinary precision, turning the metal into a work of art, something far beyond a simple weapon. King Sejong began to understand just how complex and well-coordinated the entire process was. Each person played a clear role in creating something truly remarkable. "I tried assigning people to different roles, Father," Hyang said proudly. "And it turns out, this method is incredibly effective." King Sejong nodded, acknowledging his son's ingenuity. "You're right, it really is effective. Now, I want to see how the stamping process works." Hyang responded respectfully. "Thank you, Father. I'll prepare the next demonstration right away." Deep down, he already knew. King Sejong was curious about how the iron armor was forged. Hyang then gave the order to the craftsman, "Begin iron armor production immediately." Upon hearing the command, the craftsman sprang into action. King Sejong watched closely as his son efficiently coordinated everything, and he began to realize his son truly had a gift for leadership. But something was puzzling him. "Why are you moving the cannon makers over here?" he asked. Hyang answered calmly. "Because we don't have enough craftsmen, Father." "Oh, so that's the reason," the king muttered. King Sejong crossed his arms and tried to keep his emotions in check, occasionally letting out a deep sigh. No one knew what he was thinking. Seeing this, the ministers began whispering among themselves. "This situation is getting out of hand, don't you think?" said the left minister. The right minister replied, "Sooner or later, the crown prince will demand a solution." Hyang then raised a megaphone and made an announcement. "We will now begin the production process." Above them, a heavy object hung in the air, swaying slightly, ready to strike. A craftsman carefully placed a heated iron plate onto a prepared mold. On the other side, another worker operated the pulley, positioning the upper half of the mold. In a matter of seconds, the rope was released. The massive metal weight came crashing down onto the hot iron plate. Gradually, a shape began to take form, a solid piece of armor, perfectly molded by the cast. Seeing the results, King Sejong's eyes lit up with wonder. This method is incredible. With this, mass-producing armor is no longer just a dream. You've come up with yet another brilliant solution, Crown Prince. Hyang chuckled softly, scratching his head out of habit. "But Wasn't this place also used to make gunpowder? The king asked. I'd like to see that too. Hyang looked a little awkward and hesitant. I'm sorry, father, but we can't demonstrate that right now. The king frowned. Why not? Hyang explained. Because the process is extremely complicated, and the materials are dangerous. We need to choose the right time and conditions to handle it safely. Hearing this, the king finally nodded, though a hint of disappointment remained in his expression. The left minister cautiously suggested, Your Majesty, for the sake of your health, perhaps it's time we return to the palace. King Sejong replied, Very well. Let's head back together. The moment those words were spoken, the ministers looked visibly relieved. Finally, it's over, one of them sighed. I've seen the weapons in Area 51, and they are truly astonishing. What do you all think? The king asked. The left minister answered confidently, I agree, Your Majesty, especially the cannons and firearms designed by the Crown Prince. Their power is unmatched anywhere in the world. The king stroked his chin thoughtfully and gave a slow nod. So, all of you feel the same way? The officials nodded in unison. At last, King Sejong gave a small smile and declared, In that case, we'll move forward with mass-producing these weapons. What do you all think? Hyang, sitting nearby, gave a faint smile. He had expected his father to say that. Everything was going according to plan. But then, the left minister spoke in a serious tone. Your Majesty, I must report that mass-producing these weapons will be extremely difficult. He took a deep breath before continuing. First, the labor force. Out of all our craftsmen, only a handful possess the necessary skills. Second, the supply of raw materials poses a major challenge. Even the explosive ingredients we examined, especially lard and tallow, which are essential components, are incredibly hard to obtain in large quantities. The king nodded in agreement, then asked, What if we recruit skilled craftsmen from all over Joseon to help supply the gun components? The Crown Prince responded, I'm afraid that might increase the risk of leaking our secrets. One of the ministers offered a suggestion. We can solve this by only allowing them to handle the initial stages of production. The final assembly will remain under our direct control. Besides, if our weapons rely solely on tribute, the quality can't be guaranteed. The king raised his hand to silence the room. We will not accept tribute. Instead, we'll purchase everything we need through the newly established trade office. Not only will this improve the people's welfare, it will also ensure that our craftsmen take their work more seriously. The officials exchanged glances. The plan made sense, but one lingering issue remained. The king began scratching his head, deep in thought. Yet all that came out of his mouth were unintelligible mutterings, leaving everyone confused by his behavior. Later that night, as Hyang tried to sleep, he tossed and turned in bed. Though his eyes were closed, his mind was racing. His mouth murmured nonstop. Nitroglycerin, potassium nitrate, potassium chlorate, trinitrotoluene. No one knew how many chemical compounds he listed. Naturally, the nearby eunuch overheard the strange whispers and was puzzled. He's muttering weird words again, the eunuch thought. Suddenly, Hyang's eyes flew open. That's it! I've got it! He exclaimed with excitement. The next morning, General Choi Hae-san was already waiting at the palace gates. When he saw the Crown Prince, he immediately greeted him. Your Highness, I've been waiting for you. With a bright, enthusiastic smile, Hyang replied, General Choi, I think I've found a way to solve our problem. Funny you say that, Choi responded eagerly. I think I may have found something too. The two of them, both eager to speak, kept insisting the other go first. Eventually, General Choi spoke up, this time more seriously. What if we use soybean oil? Hyang's eyes lit up, as if their thoughts had collided in the perfect synchrony. With excitement, they gave each other a high five. Let's test it right now, they said in unison. For centuries, the kingdom had used various types of vegetable oils. If soybean oil could produce glycerin, this would be a major breakthrough. This video ends here, but the story isn't over yet. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next part.